Okay, guys, so welcome to today's class. We are continuing our exploration of the textbook Exploring Leadership. Today, we are going to be looking at chapter 2. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, we did chapter 1 already, right? The introduction of chapter 1. So, today, we're going to be looking at chapter 2 of the Exploring Leadership textbook. And we're going to be picking up from where we left off last week in this chapter, and hopefully things will kind of flow into it. Um, I know you probably didn't do anything much during the week, so not gonna hold it against you. Anybody had a chance to go through this PowerPoint presentation before? Show of hands or nay or yay?
Mostly, I did not.
No? Okay. All right. So this chapter, the title of the chapter is The Changing Nature of Leadership. This chapter is, we're going to be looking at um, the evolution of leadership thinking from, well, technically from its origins to to today's environment, and we will be paying attention to the theories that have been developed to try and explain it. So once we start looking at leadership, one of the things that we have to pay attention to in a great extent is how people look at leadership. And at the very beginning, a lot of us view positions of leadership as something that we have to achieve in life. So the statement up at the top here, that leadership is often perceived as a prize or some sort of coveted phenomenon in society. Now, that is true to a great extent because many of you and many of us, I should say, who have arrived in situations at work in particular, we strive towards achieving higher levels of office that come with leadership opportunities, but not necessarily for the leadership aspect, more probably for the rewards that come with rising in your into those positions of authority in the organization. So across the board, it's always going to be a situation where some people look at leadership from that perspective, whereas other people don't want those leadership positions because it comes with too much responsibility. Um, a lot of people appreciate their leaders, and some people don't like their leaders, as they refer to it here. And the overall takeaway from the nature of leadership and leadership studies is that leadership is not a tangible item that we could go and pull apart and examine, like, a cup or a car or something like that, and examine how it works. It's an intangible phenomenon, and it operates primarily um, from an observation point of view. Erica, welcome. And that observational approach can create problems because we can't really tell what's happening inside the individual. We can simply make observations and then make some inferences based on it. So, as a result, leadership is one of the most observed activities currently, but is least understood. So, we're going to be looking at the nature of a lot of the activities that come up with it. Wow, we suddenly have people coming in. Shivanan, welcome. Um, and Anastasia, Sahadeo, welcome. All right, guys, welcome. We just started, so we're continuing from here. So there's a lot of studies that have gone on in terms of being looked at and studied and researched, and as a result, there are thousands of programs offered, a lot like these here that we have that you can see here. Now I've chosen these because, well, one, we are using this particular text in our examination of leadership, the leadership experience. I have taken part in this one here, the 7 habits of highly effective people. I'm also looked at this ELP program as well, and I've looked at a little bit of what Tony Robbins has done. I'm pretty certain that some of you all have experienced some degree of leadership training or have engaged in some sort of leadership activities um, in your job places. Hopefully, if you're active in church, some churches actually utilize um, leadership training as well because of the nature of the development of their people for moving the church forward. So you're gonna find that there are lots of programs outside there with um, with the objective of trying to explain to you how to be a good leader, how to be an effective leader, and you know how to capitalize on all those skills and whatnot. So anybody here ever took part in another any sort of leadership program or familiar with other programs? Nobody.
Nope. Sorry.
All right, nobody's. All right, so um, because of the way in which we everybody looks at leadership differently, it creates a problem in trying to define what leadership is about because everybody sees leadership from different perspectives, and it creates a problem in arriving at a single definition. Now we've already met the definition for the model that we're going to be looking at in the relational leadership model. And what we're going to be looking at here is how um, the problems associated with trying to explain leadership, especially in a more international context, because when we move from one place to another, the nature of leadership changes and the way people treat with leadership and leadership positions or people in leadership leadership roles, how they're treated in different societies. So, for example, if you're going to Eastern culture, for example, um, you're going to find that a lot of leaders are given a sense of reverence, um, and leadership there tends to arrive through age, and that um, seniority, I should say, and that is a different way in which, if you look in Western culture, where people look more at qualifications, know-how, and you know the dynamics of the individual. Those things tend to be what a lot of people try to look for in terms of leadership activity. So yeah, those things make it difficult to have this where-it-all system of just trying to look at leadership across the board. Now, regardless of where you go, the objective of us selecting leaders in our societies is to treat with the problems that face us as a society. And that's really what we want. When we, especially in the political sphere, when we select leaders, we want them to be able to find solutions for those big problems that are facing us collectively as a society. So I've listed some here: climate change, globalization issues, poverty, access to healthcare, education, and other public services. Can you all think of, or anybody suggest something that I can add to this list here? What are your concerns that you would hope our leaders could get a handle on? Christopher?
Yeah, I would say more greater access to justice,
Greater what?
greater access to justice.
Justice. Okay, so you're actually talking about crime. That's what you're really referring to as an overall thing. But yes, I can understand that access to justice. Anything else? Miss Hunt, welcome. Anybody else has anything they want to add? Anybody else? No? Wow. I could see it's a Friday even. All right. Now, the problem with it, of course, is that we have this whole laundry list of things that we want to get done. But at the end of the day, what we find happening is that the leaders that are in power can't don't come up with solutions, and as a result of these solutions not working, we end up having a situation where we start to feel a little let down by them, and we start to not trust them, and that creates what the text here refers to as the anti-leadership vaccine, because of the way in which we go about treating leaders in our society. Because generally, if our leaders are not getting the work done that we would like them to get done, oftentimes we find ourselves just treating them negatively, tossing them to a side and that kind of stuff. And that treatment creates a feeling by people in the wider society of people not being willing to take on leadership positions in their organizations. Now, that's something that's going to be interesting, because it means that far too often we find the best people who should be taking up leadership positions don't bother to take them up, because they they find the experience of getting involved in that leadership position is just kind of frustrating, um, and in a lot of instances is damaging to their personal lives, um, and that then opens the door for people in the for people to take up leadership positions who are probably not necessarily the best persons or the best people to actually act in that sense. Now, I've seen this activity take place in the public sector, where I know in the teaching service we've had some. I've seen some experiences where we have had teachers who are not very good at teaching, and they quickly move them into positions of administration to get them away from the classroom. So the idea is that we want to minimize the the negative impact they have on the student population by moving them away from direct student involvement to administrative work where they're dealing with adults, rather the other teachers and such like that. That's a phenomenon that I've found taking place in a lot of organizations, where you move people away from sensitive areas of the organization rather than dismiss them, simply because of, well, the nature of how the public sector works is that it's very difficult to dismiss somebody from those offices, because of the way the sector is set up. Now, I don't know. Has your experience ever, um, in your experience, have you ever seen that type of activity taking place? And have you ever experienced the opportunities, seeing people step away from leadership opportunities simply because they couldn't be bothered with the headache of it?
But service
Yeah,
though. But I think in service that happens a lot.
well, it happens a lot here in Trinidad as well.
Because,
Um,
like example, if someone might pilferage the system, they might just move them, put them in another department, just to save
Correct.
face.
Yeah, you slip them sideways or you slip them up.
Yeah.
There's actually a principle named after it. It's called Peter's principle of incompetence. So that when the higher up in the organization you go, the greater the level of incompetencies that you start to engage with. Thank you for contributing. So all right, now that then is one of a big issue that we pay attention to, especially if we look at the political sphere. What you find happening is that, I mean, people always say that if you want to get involved with politics, you have to be able to take on a lot. You have to have a kind of, you have to be like a duck that when people throwing things at you, it'll just run off your back, kind of thing like that. You have to be, able to handle a lot of stick and a lot of pressure based upon what is likely to happen in society because of the nature of that. That therefore discourages a lot of people who might be better suited for taking up those kind of leadership positions, and just some other people just turning up there, um, that not necessarily really have the skills necessary to be able to do the job. All right, so in the examination of leadership, what we find happening is that there's a lot of myths that have been developed, and we're going to be looking at this point. We're going to be looking at what are the myths and what is the reality when considered in relation to that. All right. So one of the first things that we have to be paying attention to when we're looking at leadership and leadership activities, we need to be paying a lot of attention to the context in which the leadership is taking place. So context simply means like leadership in a classroom is different to leadership in the office, and leadership in, let's say, if you're part of some social or community group. Leadership in all of those environments are different. Leadership in a political party, leadership in a corporation, that type of stuff. Those things means that we have to pay attention to the context in which these things are taking place in order to, put them in the correct situation. And somebody just came in there. No, Roberts. Welcome, Ms. Roberts. All right. So, what are these myths? Myths about leadership. Leaders are born, not made. Leadership is hierarchical in nature, and you need to have a formal position or have status or power to be considered a leader. You have to be charismatic or have charisma to be an effective leader. There is one way of leading, one standard way of leading. It's impossible for you to be both a manager and a leader at the same time, and you only need to have common sense to be an effective leader. So, what are the truths to this? Well, let's start with the first one. Leaders are made, not born. This course would not exist if this were the case. If leadership was a genetic activity, there was no need for us to develop any form of training for leadership or leadership programs, because everybody who would have been leaders would have some genetic code for that function, and they would just need tuning up, basically. But we still hear a lot of people talking about natural born leaders and that kind of stuff, and the science to that doesn't support it. Um, People might be predisposed by their personalities to be leaders, by the development of their personalities, but without appropriate training, without appropriate self-development, you'd find that you can put those people into leadership positions, and they simply don't. They're not effective. So at the end of the day, leadership is not something that you're born with. It's something that has to be developed, um, and sharpened to become an effective leader, as opposed to the traditional view. Leadership occurs at all levels of an organization. So this is especially becoming in as Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean region starts to look at more progressive types of organizational structures. What you find happening is that the opportunities for leadership within organizations is being allowed in as the organization flattens out a little more. So, because of the decentralization of decision making in the organization, now most organizations, modern private organizations, have recognized that having highly centralized decision making is problematic because it slows down or creates a great amount of bureaucracy in the decision making process, which makes the organization less effective. Newer, more progressive thinking organizations create more of a network approach to the structure of the organization, and therefore it offers each of those little networks offers more leadership opportunities throughout the organization. So you have a lot of team building and team organization. Now, some of our public sector services are slower to make those changes because the organizational structure has been inherited in the system, where you have this very um, line linear approach to the way in which things are done, which goes right up to parliament and so on. So you have the minister, you have their permanent secretary, you have their representatives all coming down the line. So it's very linear in nature and hierarchical in nature. But if we look into a lot of the more modern organizations outside there, you'd find that instead of doing or having um, one leader making final decisions across the board in every aspect of operations, you find you have these network of teams that are operating and making decisions and getting things done, and that actually allows for more people within the organization to be active as leaders, and in fact it creates the opportunity to develop leaders who can eventually take over an organization, especially as people get older and they move on. Do you all experience that? And for those people who work in the private sector here, do you have you experienced that type of progressive type of flattening structure, or are you still seeing just primarily the um, hierarchical system? Erica? No, Erica?
I haven't seen that so far.
Laura? All right. Laura, I'm sorry. You haven't seen what type of where do you work in the public sector or the private sector?
I'm now in the private. I was in public for over 13 years.
Right.
I'm
So
now
that's
private.
what. Okay. So in the as comparatively, do you find that the private sector is a little more flexible than the public?
Not really, at least in the experience that I've had now. Well, previously in my private sector, that would have been in banking,
Right.
and
Well,
you know the
that's
hierarchy system in there.
that yeah, that's highly structured. Yes, that's
Yes.
true.
Moving over to public, there was the same normal thing as we talked about before with, experience trumping, not your experience, sorry, service trumping experience, etc.
Correct. Yes.
But you would also see those who have the experience and the knowledge getting to move, but only if you were somebody that was favored at times.
Right. So it had to do about the
Right now,
Paliwal system.
yes. Now, in my experience with this company, what I notice is it takes forever for people to move. It really, really takes forever. I can see somebody who's doing the same thing I'm doing, and they've been in that same position with no movement at all for about 15 to 16 years.
This is the
No
banking sector.
sign that there would be progress for them at all.
This is the banking
I-
sector.
No, this is advertising.
Oh, well, it may be more a feature of the industry, as that there's not much growth taking place in the industry,
Doesn't. I think there's not much growth.
right? Because you kind of, um, well, I've always found that we've kind of plateaued when it comes to the amount of firms operating in that thing. I think the only thing that really changes is when there's some form of major innovation in technique more than anything else. I know, like, um, that area when they started to get into animation more, that kind of opened it up a little bit, and then they kind of reeled back because of the expense involved with that too.
Yeah. But digital and social media has opened it up more, but
Right. But then
like
it's reached another plateau.
yeah, it's like where do you move from here?
Correct. Yeah.
Where can they find room for you kind of thing? So
Yeah.
it's more of a for many people to grow, they have to come out and do their own thing or move to
That
somewhere else that has
gener-
that growth.
yeah, and that's the problem. Can the market absorb another firm? That becomes the issue. Is the market large enough to for people who have that level of experience to step out of that organization and set up their own operations, be their own leaders, basically, because that's the next
What I've
step up.
noticed, what I've noticed is the people who have,
Hmm.
they don't depend on the trend of market. A lot of
The-
the international companies are willing to work with smaller agencies internationally and pay the fees.
Right, that makes sense
So
though, because
yeah,
there's
you're
wider
not looking
opportunities there.
at here only.
Right, but that's actually probably the only area of growth that'll be available because, as I said, this market is kind of saturated in terms of it's well serviced. Then let's put it that way. All
Yeah,
right,
correct. I
cool.
like that terminology. Well service, correct.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so charisma. Now, charisma is not a prerequisite for leadership, and more importantly, charisma is a dangerous element of leadership. Now, we talked about this before, but we're going to have to examine this in a lot more details at this point, and in this particular presentation, we'll come across it twice. The reason for that is because charisma is not so much about the leader, but it's about the impact that or the effect that leader has on people around them. So it's dangerous because one, it's subjective, and two, it's emotive, which can be potentially unpredictable and violent in nature. Now, one of the things that we've pointed out here is that people who utilize or are charismatic in nature tend to be more visionary type leaders, and they have very strong ideas of where they want to go in the future, and they can, through that charisma, motivate people to work towards it. But it creates a problem if the objectives that they have are negative objectives. This is what Drucker is speaking about here. He's talking about the three most charismatic leaders in the previous century created the most amount of suffering in the human race, and he identified Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. Now, I don't know if any of y'all, well, we talked about Hitler, we talked about Stalin before in the last presentation. Anybody knows who the references to Mao is? Anybody?
No, sir.
Chairman Mao, the chairman of the Communist Party in China. He was the first chairman, and during the period when he developed or took China into communism, millions of people died in that transition, and he did it through a form of charisma. Charisma was one of the things that we looked at. Now it's kind of difficult for us to look at that and see it from that perspective, because it wasn't well documented in the sense of first and foremost, it's already in a different language, so it creates a bit of a problem for us to follow. Same thing that happened with Hitler and Stalin. It was difficult for us to do that unless we, really went and pay attention. But their actions led to millions of people being killed and executed in a lot of instances. The point that Drucker is saying, it's not the leader's charisma that is critical. What is critical is the leader's mission statement. So here we have four charismatic leaders. We have Mahatma Gandhi, we have Hitler, we have Martin Luther King. Anybody recognizes this guy with the shades?
So isn't he the one?
Go ahead. The young lady who was speaking. Who's that? Go ahead. No, not hearing anymore though.
By chance, is he Jim Jones?
Yes, he is Jim Jones.
The one who killed all people on the island.
He killed one?
Sorry. My bad.
No. What were you saying?
I remember that he was the one who. Never mind.
All right. So see if this makes sense to you. If you remember him, he's the Right Reverend Dr. Jim Jones, and he was responsible for mass suicide in Jonestown, Guyana. That sounds familiar?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now,
So which part, Guyana?
in Guyana, yeah. The Guyanese government, who was in charge? I think it's Forbes Burnham was the prime minister of Guyana. Offered them some property. He bought some property from Guyana, in Guyana, and what was happening was that the CIA and the American government was kind of investigating his activities, because as part of his process, he was fleecing money from people as well. And he was getting people to sign over their life savings and all this kind of thing as well, because of the nature of what he was doing. And you would have thought it was a whole set of uneducated poor people that he was getting involved with. It wasn't. It was middle class Americans who were pretty highly educated, many of them with degrees, and what he was able to do, he capitalized on the civil rights movement as well, because what you found happening is that you had a lot of young um, uh, non-white citizens of the United States who were marginalized in their society. In fact, you had a wide cross-section, white, black, Chinese, Hispanic. And the idea was that he was able to manipulate these people because of his charisma. And they bought in, I mean, literally bought into this idea and the ideology that he had. And then when he took them across to Guyana, now there are a lot of films documenting. I should find some of those. Really, and it really is documenting what took place, and it was really heartbreaking to see the children involved and how all of that stuff happened. It was really, really bad the way that happened. And the unfortunate thing is that it has to do with this charismatic situation, and it's happened so often because one of the last, for example, some of you all might be familiar with Waco, Texas. You're familiar with that one with David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. Anybody knows it happens
Yes,
a
sir.
lot? Yeah, and that was another person, David Koresh. He believed he was the second coming of the Branch Davidian, and he had the responsibility of repopulating the earth with anointed, blessed people. And he got all these, again, marginalized individuals in society to get together, give all their money over to him, and he told them they couldn't sleep with their wives anymore, and he started to have children with everybody's. It was ridiculous that type of thing seems to happen when we look at it from our position outside. Anybody is familiar with Scientology? That's another organization that's looked upon as being almost like a cult-based activity. Um, Anybody here is
Yes.
from
Yes,
Yes,
Scientology,
sir.
sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
And one of their biggest proponents is actually, well, you have John Travolta and Tom Cruise, who are members of that organization. But you could look at online at some of the things about Scientology and the way in which it comes across like this cult type activities. Quite interesting. And the funny thing about it then, it has to be, how in hindsight, when we look back at things and we see how it took place, we start to recognize that these people started off from being attracted to the individual, and they were providing a solution to the problem that they were facing. And that solution, so in the case of Hitler, his solution was geared towards explaining and taking Germany out of its problem after World War I, and building it up into the fatherland, the father of the world kind of situation like that, and that movement kind of is a similar type of attitude that they were able to develop, and this is one of the things that they talk about, that well, there's we'll come back to charismatic leadership, and we'll start to see that it's not only about the charisma of the individual, but also the timing. That's also going to be a unique element of charismatic leadership. So for now, what we say is that you don't necessarily need to have charisma, though it will help, but we have to be careful as followers to ensure that the activities that these charismatic leaders are getting into or getting involved with, that we question it from a very logical point of view, and we don't get sucked into the type of things that's talking about it.
Mr. Bisdo,
Yeah, go ahead.
so would you consider Kishore a charismatic leader or autocratic leader?
I don't see him. Charisma has very broad appeal, um, and no, I won't say he's charismatic, but he's very autocratic. That's a different type of leader. He has that kind of my way or the highway kind of situation. Charisma is something that appeals to a wide section of the society. Uh, who can I say? Where Dr. Eric Williams was pretty charismatic, actually. If you look back on that, um, like him or not, Basdio Pandey was pretty charismatic as well. Um, so
Camilla?
we've had
What about Camilla?
no, she doesn't have that charisma. They tried working on her charisma, her appeal factor, but she doesn't have the level of appeal that some of the other people have. Yes, Amina, Kasim.
What makes what makes a leader charismatic?
And that's the problem. What makes a leader charismatic is an unknown feature. It's about likability. It's about the shape of their face, their ability to turn a
A
phrase.
charm, perhaps? A
So
personality?
that man, it involves a host of different things that pull together to make somebody charismatic. And the charisma is not something that can be measured independently. It has to be measured in relation to what other people feel about you or that individual. So, have you ever felt an affinity to a particular person for no other reasons than you just simply, in Trinidad, we have this
Uh,
saying that your blood
Connect.
just take them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a form of charisma. And people in leadership positions who have that reaction from somebody, they can get that level of effect, that effect from people in and around them. All right. So again, what we have to do is we have to be careful as followers that if we do get involved with charismatic leaders, that we pay attention to what they want to do, and we keep on measuring things from the position of is is what we're doing correct. And this is why our responsibility of followers is something that's going to come up in the organizational structure of leadership, because of the way we're going to be looking at leadership. All right, now the same way we just talked about Dr. Keith Rowley, there's not just one right way to lead. There are different methods of leadership. Now, most persons lead based upon their life experiences and training and that type of stuff. Um, their cultural identity, their personal value system, their gender, those things will affect their styles. The theory that we're going to be looking at is that if you are aware of the context in which you're exercising leadership, you would find that different types of contexts require different types of leadership in order for you to have a broader of effectiveness in the environment. Okay, so there's not just one way to lead, there are multiple ways to lead. All right, so the importance of distinguishing between management and leadership. So this speaks to the assumption that we cannot be managers and leaders. The reality of this situation is that yes, you can, but and that's simply because at any point in time in any organization, you are not going to be exercising leadership activities every second of every day once you're in the organization or once you're in a managerial position. Managers have to balance between leadership activities and managerial or administrative duties. All right. So if you are in the room writing up some memos and stuff like that, that's not managerial. Sorry, that's not leadership. That's managerial. But if you're having a meeting and you're trying to convince people of a particular point of view or particular direction to take, that's where leadership comes into play. So the concept is that the difference, however, is that management is focused on the outcomes and goals of the organization, whereas leadership should be developed based upon trying to improve the relationship between yourself and the individuals within the organization in the goal of accomplishing or achieving the goals of the organization. So that's the distinction, and therefore there's no um, hard and fast or mutually exclusive events that take place between the two. They will in fact overlap with each other. Sometimes in doing something from a management point of view, you are overlapping into leadership activities as well. So those are a lot of things that come up in relation to this. So managers are oftentimes preoccupied in doing things the right way, whereas leaders are focused on doing the right thing. So there's a distinction there. The right way means the way in which the company wants it done, the way that it's probably the most effectively done. As opposed to that, leaders tend to focus on doing the right thing. The right thing meaning the right thing for the common good of all people around us. That's going to be an important element of distinction between the behaviors of managers and leaders. And oftentimes, however, there's a good overlap between the two, although there have been situations in which that has not been the case, where managers of organizations have chosen methods of getting things done that were very dangerous or very unfair to everybody around them, and they didn't care. And that has to do with the ethical values that come with the managerial decisions or the organizational decisions. It's one of the reasons why we have some accountants in this class. Coming out of 2008 to 2010, the ACTT, the um, not ACTT, ACCA actually reviewed their ethical training for accountants as a result of some of the things that was done during the financial crisis of 2008. Any accountants here in the class? Anybody studying accounts? I mean,
Yes, sir, studying.
right. So, are you familiar with that? Nicholas, I see your hand up. You all familiar with those changes that took place in the standards?
No, this is the first time I hear about it, but
Oh,
I
okay.
know accountants is work some heinous hours.
When talking about the hours, we're talking about
The
the
treatment,
the
ethics.
the ethical values. Yes,
Right.
ethical
Okay.
values. All right. You can thank people like Enron and them for that, and Bernie Madoff for those types of things. Um, all right, so we understand this distinction between management and leadership, and in fact, there's a part that we're going to talk about where they talk about leadership being episodic in nature, and we'll look at that in a little bit. Leadership is teachable, so the end result of this statement is that this program wouldn't exist if leadership wasn't a teachable idea or concept. All right, so the way in which we go about doing it varies from program to program, and we have a particular methodology we're going to utilize in our program here. All right, so definitions of leadership. So leadership started, or the term leadership was traced back to about the 1300s, and it's actually the word leader came up in the English language. Now, for those of you who might have some English background, in the 1300s, they weren't really speaking English yet. They were speaking something called Middle English or Early English. By about the 1800s, we started to get the English language kind of settling down to what we look at what we kind of using today, more or less, more modern type thing. And the word leadership emerged during that period of time. But anytime those terms were utilized, it was always in reference to the political situation that was being described, that these words tended to come up. Definitions, however, of leadership um, prior to 1929 were very few and far between. So you'd see that 19, the early 19th century, well, 1990 to 1929, the early 20th century is when really started to get some people investigating what is leadership. Prior to that, leadership was based upon one other thing. By the 1980s, we have 110 definitions of leadership created by academic circles, 221 found in other books and publications, 366 publications on leadership that have no definitions of leadership, or don't define it in anything at all. All right, so here we're talking about from the 1900s to the 1980s, the development of the concept of looking at leadership as an area of study. One of the early definitions, and we talked about this before, by Mumford, defined leadership as the preeminence of one or a few individuals in a group in the process of controlling societal phenomena. We can look at this in the form of like the master of puppets type of thing, somebody who is manipulating people in the background and trying to get them to do the things you want them to get done. Basically, it means that you're manipulating or controlling people in some nefarious way to get them to do the things you would like them to do. In fact, a type of leadership philosophy kind of came up in that early 1700s, and so was the Machiavellian technique of leadership. Any of you all familiar with that Machiavellian Prince Machiavelli? No?
No, sir.
No? Ah, wow. That's probably one of the most definitive things about leadership and the Machiavellian nature of this puppeteering type of activity that they talk about here. Something we also go looking into the letters to Prince Machiavelli. All right, so this definition, however, this early definition really does sound a little sinister in nature, and it's not necessarily going to be one that stayed very long because people don't like to think about themselves as being manipulated and controlled by other people in the situation, right? So in the modern world, our definitions today tend to look more at the relationship of people working together in a process to get to some positive goal or change. All right. And obviously, between then to now, we have to look at the transition and what was going on between them. All right. Between then and now, where were we? How do we arrive at this situation um, of looking at leadership from that type of perspective? Now, one of the ways that we have to go about trying to understand leadership is because leadership is such a very problematic area of describing really what instead of defining the terms directly, what they tried to utilize was a system of metaphoric definitions. So rather than directly telling us um, what leadership is, they use a metaphor to describe it. So you have the competitive market metaphor. For those of you who are into business, you should understand the consensus market, the democratic market, the administrative, sorry, not market, metaphors, guys, collective bargaining metaphor. In almost every field of major activities, you're going to find that there's some sort of comparative that was made to try and explain leadership. Now, one of the favorite ones from the text is actually going to be looking at the metaphor of the symphony or the orchestra. So if we look at this here, the picture itself shows us leadership in action. You have a whole host of people surrounded this one individual with the baton. Each one of them, or each groups, you have several groups of people depending upon the instrument that they're utilizing, all seemingly doing different things at the same time and trying to make some form of music. Now, how many people in this class are musically oriented in the sense that they play an instrument or they've been part of a band? And it could be any kind of instrument for that matter, or maybe just your voice as an instrument. Rashawn, what type of activity was that? And Archibald.
Um, I play guitar, and when I was younger, I learned to play pan and piano.
Right, good. And Archibald?
Guitar and piano, sir.
Right, and you played in any kind of band or you played with the church or
Yeah,
what did you?
been to it
The church,
for
right.
at
So
least 18 years.
all right, okay, good. So you might be more familiar with the jazz metaphor, which is, check this one out here. The jazz band must choose the music, find the right musicians, and perform in a public environment. Um, the effect of the performance is dependent upon the environment, the volunteers playing in the band, the need for everybody to perform as an individual as well as together, and then everybody's depending upon the leader and the members of the band to do a good job. Sounds familiar for those of you? So it looks something like this, especially if we have a small unit working together. Not necessarily in with these types of instruments, but more of the traditional, like you have a guitar, piano, a drummer, maybe possibly a percussion person. If you play pan, pan is divided into different orchestral sections. So you have guitar, pan, double tenors. Anybody else played pan here besides those two gentlemen? Didn't learn to play pan in school and stuff. Aaliyah, what pan well, what instrument did you learn to play? Well,
Uh, yeah.
okay, all right. No, we're not hearing you clearly. Did you put it in the chat? Nope. Okay. Pan and piano. All right, cool. I get it. Thanks a lot. All right. So when we say pan, though, that's a wide arrangement. So the idea is these metaphors were utilized to define leadership in a manner that, of course, with any sort of metaphoric definition, it's supposed to make the concept a lot easier. Doesn't necessarily fully explain it, but it gives us an idea of what leadership is all about. In the picture here, who do you think might be the leader? The drummer, the trumpeter, the bassist, or the saxophone guy? Anybody who's in music here, who do you think is kind of leading things there?
The saxophone guy.
Really? Why? What makes you say that?
They generally have lead roles.
Well, what when you
Lead
say a lead
drummers.
role, what do you mean?
Like solo pieces to play. They could generally tend to carry the entire melody, whereas the bass, well, he has his role to play. The drummer is for timing, and I'm guessing the
Wow.
brass.
Okay.
He's for fills and um accentuations on the music.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. That I
So his
in my
instrument more or less sings the song.
okay, because I've been in bands that have brass in it, and the brass section is never the leader. You know who tends to be the leader? The piano player. The piano, bass, and guitar. They set the body work down, and everybody else is embellishing on top of it. But you never know. You could be right. Doesn't matter. Different circumstances, different leadership. But generally, when it comes to leadership, you the person responsible for setting the timing is the drum and the bass. Those two, if those two people not talking to each other, the rest of the band will sound like crap. Let's just remember that. Excuse me, guys. All right. So we talked about we dealt with the jazz metaphor as a powerful kind of thing that kind of brings up all that inclusiveness and valuing individuality and that kind of stuff. Another metaphor that comes up or comes to mind is a sports team. How many people are into soccer and cricket and well, I say soccer, some people say football, but how many of you all into that? Show of hands kind of thing. Yeah, well, same people. Um, have you ever played uh, the best versus the rest of the world? Have you ever put together that kind of team?
You mean something like drafting the best in the world and making like a A team or S team or something like that?
Yeah. That's what I mean.
If you play FIFA or EFC right now, you can ultimate team make the
Ultimate
best.
teams?
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
play some games like that.
Right. So that's on a game console. The,
Yeah.
they yeah. In fact, at one point in time, y- uh, European football used to do that. They used to kind of do the best versus the rest kind of teams, and half the time the best used to lose. You know why? Because when the best got together, they played as individuals, not as a team. Because you have all these great, powerful people, strikers and midfielders and all kind of stuff. But when they got together, they didn't work properly as a team. It's similar to the development of a national squad. Um, because you have all these stars coming together, it takes a while for them to coalesce into a team of individuals. It's probably one of the reasons why Spain was so successful in that World Cup that they won, was because the vast majority of players who were playing on that Spanish team, they all played with Juventus. I don't know if any of you all followed that. That was what, 2 or 3 World Cups ago. Any of you? That was with Iniesta and God, who was the striker with him? By God, I can't remember all these people. It's been so many games. You're familiar with that? No. I'm talking
I
absolute.
am. Yeah.
I took. Uh huh.
Yeah.
You're familiar with it? Do you remember the striker that worked with Iniesta? It was Iniesta and who again?
I think the striker was Fernando Torres, if I'm correct.
Torres, right? Yes.
Yeah.
And but the back line was real good too. The
I think that World Cup was Ramos, Pilo,
Pilo, that's it.
yeah,
Those guys were just
Casillas,
they.
and Pus.
All right, and they were all from Juventus. They were all no, not Juventus, from Real Madrid, and because they had that team connection, they were able to pull that entire team together. It's probably one of the reasons why Portugal has never really been able to pull off a World Cup because they so heavily dependent upon Ronaldo to pull everything together, and there's not a lot of teamwork going on there. You know, you could have, as I said, you can have the very best persons in the world, but if they're not working together as a team, then they're not going to be as successful. All right, um, so this was the other thing in terms of defining leadership in terms of a metaphoric thing that they referred to this as leadership as an episodic affair, and this is the same thing I was saying before. Leadership here is not something that's done all the time, every second of every day, but it's done in little episodes here and there, 5-10 minutes here, or half an hour here, that kind of stuff. It's time specific, place specific, context specific. So what you find happening is that you don't operate as a leader every second of every day. Consider, let's say you are the leader in an organization. Are you a leader everywhere you go? Inside that organization, do you not have friends? When you get home, you're still the leader. You know, again, the practicality of leadership is that it's episodic in nature, and you engage in leadership activities when necessary, and you disengage from that when it's not necessary. So this episodic metaphor is also a very interesting method for that. All right. Okay, so let's look into the generation of theories now. So again, the theories are going to be sitting upon um, a lot of behavioral science and social sciences. Now we know that from early on, the problem with social science, earlier versions of social science, was a lack of evidence-based theory development. And because leadership is such a problematic issue to look at, or elusive component, or elusive idea, there was a multidisciplinary approach to trying to look at it. And we're going to see how, you know, how things moved over time. So we're going to be looking at the problems that those theories had, and well, basically going to be looking at their development through time. So the theories that we're going to be looking at are the great man theory, trait theory, behavioral theory, situational contingency, influence theories, reciprocal leadership approaches, chaos theory, and there's one other that I didn't put here called authentic leadership. All right. So we're going to be looking at all of these theories. So let's start with the great man approach. So the great man approach. Now, one of the things I want us to pay attention to is, given the time frame that these theories emerged, we need to pay attention to what was happening on an international scale in the context of main ideas and approaches to thinking. That's something we're going to have to pay attention to, because across the board, the theories were influenced by the general thinking processes that govern the time frames that we're looking at there. All right, so let's for example, the great man theory is probably one of the earliest theories which was dominated by Darwinistic thinking. So if we think about this is the early 1900s. Anybody's familiar with Darwin, Charles Darwin, and what theory he came up with? Nobody knows Charles Darwin? We don't have science-based people in this class.
So you know the name, but not necessarily the style of leadership.
No, it's not leadership. What did Darwin come? Amira?
Something with biology.
Yes, from bio, yes.
BUSI theory of evolution.
Theory of evolution and natural selection, yes? That sounds
Yeah,
familiar?
yeah, that Yeah.
All right,
I can't.
Anastasia, you can't remember the
But I know
specific.
Darren's theory.
Right, and he was the one who talked about evolution too.
Oh,
He had the
Yes?
Big Bang Theory.
that's
No, Big Bang is somebody else. Around the same time, but Big Bang Theory is Einstein. The wrong individual. But what first and foremost, here we're talking about Darwin and biology in terms of humans. Big Bang Theory is about ultimate creation. Darwinism is about the evolution of human beings. And the at the time that the Greatman approach was developed, the theory, the 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 general scientific thinking was dominated by this Darwinist theory. And that therefore had an impact upon the nature of the theory that was developed because it was under the assumption that leadership was based upon hereditary properties and therefore they developed this particular thing. The great man theory is based upon the concept of a set of individuals, brothers in particular, of the king who all had similar hereditary types of traits who had particular powers and influence. And it was believed that in order to maintain those properties, those powers and abilities, they had to intermarry to be able to continue the lineage. So, what happens when people interbreed with their cousins and their second cousins and stuff like that? What starts
the
to happen?
sure, the children they have like they get a condition.
Uh huh. They they
Yeah,
they yeah they start to have
unhappy.
some like Down syndrome is one of them. Um,
Yes, like that.
although Down syndrome is not actually one that comes from inbreeding, it can happen to a lot of people. Um, but no, they start to have genetical problems. They start to come up with autism and different types of ailments. Start to treat with them, but eventually they become. It can get so bad that they can actually have physical issues. But the idea here is that the individuals produced from marriage into the family tends to have a detrimental impact upon the brain development of these individuals. But you can start to see where this whole concept is because you'd recognize here that they're talking about in order to maintain the the lineage of an individual, they had to look for an appropriately leveled individual from society. So they had to get married to somebody of equal class in their particular thing. So if we take out the intermarriage element, you'd still recognize that you had a bunch of individuals in different countries that were considered to be kings and queens, and they would interchange in terms of marrying the daughter from this kingdom will marry the prince from this area, and that kind of nonsense would go on in order to maintain the particular class sector of the thing. So um, that's why I guess they had so much problems when Prince Charles first married um, Lady Diane and that type of stuff. So yeah, a lot of problems. Interestingly enough, though, at the time this theory was being pulled together, any sort of woman that arose in the situation to become good leaders or great leaders was simply ignored by the theory. The theory was only about great men, not great women. So, of course, we could see there's a gender bias to that theory. Soon enough, however, that theory gave way to the traits approach in the um, later part of the 19th century. Um, that that approach then started to say, okay, they're going to move away from looking at a particular grouping of individuals and rather, instead of looking at those individuals, especially those from the aristocracy, they were looking at a particular set of traits that individuals can have that would put them in predispositions for leadership. So here we have particular traits such as intelligence, height, self-confidence that differentiated them from non-leaders, thus making them successful. Now, what they're not saying here is the other characteristics, because when they were writing this book, that they were being a little more sensitive, I guess, or even the authors here were being sensitive. First of all, it's only men. Second, they were only Caucasian. Um, they had to have blue eyes or green eyes, that kind of stuff. So the idea here is that the traits that were assuming these individuals will be leaders were of a particular group of individuals. And this was shaped because right after or coming out of Darwinistic thinking was the concept coming up into this area here of development was the concept of eugenics. So, any of you are familiar with that term, eugenics? Anastasia, you might be probably the one person that might know this because it was very popular at that point in time. Eugenics was one of the theories that led to a lot of the different activities that took place during World War II. Anybody, any other bio people here? All right, so eugenics was concerned about the genes of individuals and controlling and shaping children, in particular, the development of children, where you had particular types of characteristics that you can produce. Today we refer to it as genetics, and gen, you all have to help me here. Genetical engineering, gene splicing, and that kind of stuff still falls into this area of this stuff. Problem with this, of course, was the list that they were putting together was never um, the correlation between the characteristics they were talking about and the characteristics of the actual people who rose to leadership didn't really mesh properly. So, for example, during this period of time, one of the world's leaders that rose and became a huge leader um, was Hitler, and Hitler wasn't tall; he was very short, and he was a little challenged as well. So, those are different
Well,
things.
but
So,
he killed plenty of people.
yes, he did. He was responsible for the death
That's
of, yeah, him as well as
bad.
other people. But this was the thinking. In fact, the Nazi Party had a lot of eugenics people in it. In fact, one of the reasons why some of the things that took place in the the death camps or the the uh, the Jewish with the Jewish people in particular was that Menkel and other German um, doctors, for example, experimented with they conducted a lot of medical experiments of a barbaric nature. In fact, they did a twin study and they were having um, transplanting things, and they did a lot of really horrible things as part of their studies in eugenics to ensure that first of all to prove that the Aryan race was a superior race and that no other race was going to be um, well, no other race was good for anything else but servitude. Besides, leadership was only the the available to Aryan people, white people, basically.
So
So
and he burned plenty books as well.
yes,
Which,
challenged. Yeah,
to read
they but again, reason for that would be yeah,
books.
yeah, he had a lot of bonfires with books, and the reason for that was anybody who challenged his point of view from that's what he did with anybody who challenged his point of view. He beat them down, in that well, not only him, but the party itself, the Nazi party, they in order to put down the opposition to his rise, they would get rid of people, and anybody who spoke against them, they were seen as dissenters and that kind of stuff, and they started to jail them. This is how the whole situation got kicked up and started, and then, well, if the rest of the world don't want to follow us, we'll make them follow us, kind of thing, and that was where that took it. But this trait theory kind of came up during that same period there. All right. Now, coming out of that, now we then had the development of behavioral approaches. Now, so between behavioral approaches and the trait theory, World War II happened. So that is a huge set of things that happened. So a lot of studies stopped, kind of like going on there. So the behavioral approaches, what they tried to do was to observe the behaviors of individuals, especially in the managerial activities, and look at what behaviors were good managers using as opposed to those who are not as effective. Now, what happened after World War II was that the world had to go into a major reconstruction effort because World War II wiped out most of Europe, especially Germany and England. Both of those countries and France and everybody else were just bombed to shit. And the only set of individuals who really weren't that much affected was the United States and other places in Latin America and so on. They were able to maintain their productive capacity. But the England and Europe, they were kind of had to go into this rebuilding thing. And you had this sort of industrialization approach to the development of building more factories, setting things up. So all of the behaviors that were observed would be in the context of factory operations that we're going to be looking at here. So picture in your mind a group of scientists, behavioral scientists, coming into a factory with their lab coats on, and they're standing around observing people because they're using the observational approach to this thing, and they're making these observations and have this little check, what do you call it, a clipboard, and they're taking notes and checking off activities and so on. So behavioral approaches, therefore, primarily is looking for behaviors of good managers as opposed to negative managers. Wow, who's that? Somebody still coming in. Oh, Taran had a problem. Piano. Hey, Jolene said she played sax. Great. Or did she play the sax? Or the sax guy was the important guy? All right. So let's look at the behavioral approaches. So again, they were going to be looking at the behaviors of effective and ineffective people. Again, that would have been measured from outcomes of the organization. And the field of psychology was the one that kind of led this field. And you'd see the time frame in which we're talking about here is 1950s to 1960s, because as I said before, 1947 was when World War II ended. Technically, that was when it in Europe it finished in 1945, but it continued for a few more years with Japan, because you have to also remember the Americans were at war with Japan, and Japan got wiped out as well. Remember, they got bombed into. That's where the atomic bombs were dropped, and therefore they had to also go through that rebuilding process as well. China was partially involved with that as well. That during that period of time, you also had the communist movement coming to the forefront there, and they were also doing their own reconstruction, and cultural revolution was taking place in China during that same period as well. We have a whole set of things coming up from it. So during the period of the 1950s to 60s, we had the behavioral approaches coming up. So, am I going the right way? Right. So two studies came up here, and you'd see the American studies, which makes sense because remember, the United States, their schools weren't really negatively affected by a lot of the activities that was going on. So these two universities came up together by looking at managerial behaviors under two dimensions: consideration behavior and initiating structure. So consideration was described as the degree to which leaders act in a friendly and supportive manner, showing concerns for their subordinates and looking out for their welfare, as opposed to initiating structure is the degree to which the leader defines and structures his or her own role and the roles of subordinates towards the attainment of the formal groups. Now, this is what behavioral theorists and then the statistical analysis that goes with it calls bivariate analysis. So they look at these two categories of behaviors and started to make observations of would an effective leader engage in how much of these types of behaviors and another one this type of behavior and see who was kind of doing what. So they'd observe what they would call an effective leader as opposed to an ineffective leader and try to work out what was going on. So these two concepts or these two variables that were independent of each other, so they could have been behaving in they could have been using any combination between the two. So all they were looking at was frequency of activity. Now, Blake and Mouton, they also pulled this set of approach to another bivariate approach, concern for people, concern for production. Well, from the very name you could tell. Behaviors that indicated some concern for the people in the organization as opposed to behaviors that were only concerned with getting production organized. Both of those theories just sort of kind of concluded that effective managers showed high concern for people and production. So non-committal type of things. Michigan's studies, they came up with a broader situation where they had three different types of behaviors: task-oriented behaviors, relationship-oriented behaviors, and participative behaviors. And what they eventually came up with, so this is a more complex type of observational theory. And again, they were looking at task-oriented would be those behaviors that were designed for accomplishing the goals of the organization. Of course, relationship had to do with the any sort of things that showed concern for the behavior, concern for the employees and their situation. Participative were the behaviors that allowed for input into the decision-making process from outside of the leader themselves. Participative leadership activities. Kind of interesting idea, but and again, there was no kind of definition of what sets of or how much of these types of things would create a good relationship or good manager as opposed to the others. So at the end of the day, what started to happen with these things is that first and foremost, these behaviors were first of all trying to describe a situation that was very complicated. They were non-specific in their outcome and therefore they couldn't draw proper conclusions from it. One of the main things that they also paid attention to here was that they were ignoring the context in which these behaviors were being observed or these situations in which they were looking at. So now they're going to say, all right, well, we were ignoring one major variable, the circumstance or the situation in which decisions were being made and the leadership was being practiced in. So therefore, they had to go back now and start to relook at the theories, and that led them to situational contingency approach. So now, okay, so we realized we made a mistake before, so we need to go back and start to do these things. But this time, we're going to be paying attention to the circumstance in which this leader is acting. So so now we have to pay attention to the context in which the behavior is trying to take place. All right, so the situation determines who will emerge as the leader, and the leader being the product of the situation. So those are kind of the mindsets that they started to have. So the contingency theory or situational theories emphasizes that leadership behavior cannot be explained in a vacuum, and elements of the situation must be included. So this is the whole justification for the shift from the simpler versions of this thing. So they first came up with this theory called least preferred co-worker model. All right. Wow, that's a really nice name. And then they developed another theory called the path goal theory in 1957. So you see, there's the latter part of the 1960s after they made some of the conversion from the behavioral approaches into the contingency situational approaches. Now, at the end of the day, both of these theories are already telling us one of two things: that in order to to motivate people, you had to combine, or you had to be aware that individuals have personal objectives in life, whereas the organization has their own, or what we call organizational objectives. So a good leader is supposed to try to get the employee to see that in achieving the goals for the organization, they will get access to their personal goals. So let's put it this way: if I want to buy a house, and I want to look after my family, then it is important for me to earn bonuses, to earn my salary, and so on. But the only way I'm going to get my salary and get those bonuses is if I produce the goods necessary, or to put in the production time at the job. So this, as for those of you who are into behavioral sciences, will start to see this is the emergence of motivational theories, where in this case here, what we're looking at is the beginning of the kind of carrot on a stick approach. So if, for those of you who may not be familiar with this, you you tell somebody that if they end up in a particular, they do certain things, they will earn a reward. So basically, you hang, you put a carrot on a stick and you put it in front of a donkey, and the donkey will keep moving towards that personal reward that they're looking for, while accomplishing the goals of the organization, which is transporting the individual that who's in charge or whatnot. Of course, every now and again, you have to make sure that the donkey can get a little bite of the apple or the carrot, or else they're gonna sit down on the job, right? So that's the beginning of that type of motivational approaches to the theory. So this is some of the things that came up about that. Problem with that was, again, the theory lacked a lot of supporting research. Again, that was based upon the problems of how the research is being conducted, and there was very unclear association between commitment and competencies of subordinates and their levels of development. So again, inconclusive data and inconclusive outcomes that in fact they were unable to repeat. So that's another thing. When we conduct research, research is supposed to give us outcomes that are repeatable. So um, those the scientific approach was really taking a beating at this point in time in terms of how things were being done. All right, so then we have influence theories, and this is where we come back now to um, to charisma. Now, you'd notice those two dates there. In 1924 and 1947, Max Weber started developing his research in this area. Now, those two time frames are important for the simple reason: 1924 was the emergence of the Nazi movement out of Germany, and 1947 was the end of the period. So Max Weber was looking at the nature of charisma in a managerial context to describe what was taking place. So influence theory was really looking closely at the in the charismatic nature of leadership, and he started to make some sort of observations. So initially, Weber was making these observations, and then Burns, who came up, no, Robert House actually in 1977. This is just after, was also took up that thing and continued doing it, and started to formalize the leadership theory as based upon testability things. And this is where they were talking about. They started to identify the elements of charisma. Um, and one of the things that they started to look at was the shape of somebody's face, the sound of their voice, um, the type of clothes they wore. Um, any of y'all ever saw that film about that girl who wanted to invent this diagnostic machine with one drop of blood? Any of y'all ever saw that film? Can't remember. It's a series. In any event, um, she copied her behaviors to Steve Jobs, or Jobs, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Um, in terms of how she dressed and how she stood. And she, what she did is that she lowered her voice, the tenor of her voice, because the lower timbre of your voice creates more attractiveness and sounds you sound more authoritative based upon the tonalities that you develop. So those are some of the things that they started to look at. Also, the way in which you look at people, the eye contact you develop. So between Robert House and Max Weber, they started to do a lot of work on this thing. And the reason why they were paying attention to these things was because of the recent impact we had in relation to charismatic leaders in our societies. Now, 1977, if you remember, that was around the time of Vietnam, and you had a whole set of things coming up from there that we're going to be dealing with in a little bit. All right. Now, what they really came across to is that charisma is something that the leader has to exhibit, but your your charisma kind of backtrack on you because it's really not only you. It's based upon how people respond to you. So consider, for example, somebody like I want to use a really. I'm wondering if you all could remember this person. Charlie Manson. You all familiar with Charles Manson?
Yes, sir. He was the leader of a cult.
Yes. And he had these young ladies who went with him on, well, they went on his instructions and they killed a lady. No, they killed some people, including a baby and that kind of stuff. You're familiar with that? And what happened during the period of his trial, he had all these girls who would start behaving a particular way. They cut crosses into the top of their heads and all those kinds. So we came across this kind of the Charles Charles Manson was considered to be extremely charismatic, and that is the kind of thing that really pushes us into thinking that people who are charismatic, you have to pay more attention to what they want done, as opposed to whether or not you like the person or not. That was the individual. I mean, if you look at the person, he's
think of
re-
Princess Diana is a charismatic leader. She was a charismatic leader. She was liked by
yes,
many.
yes, she was admired by lots and lots of people. Unfortunately for us, she engaged in more positive ideas and ideology. So she had a lot of people who followed her. Unfortunately, hers were negative in nature. But one thing was missing from her, though, that existed back in the time frames of these individuals was the other element that they talked about here, which is that the theory started to posit that charismatic leadership usually comes to the fore in times of crisis, and this is where they are likely to have their biggest impact, because in times of crisis, when you find somebody who's coming to you and being charismatic, or is considered charismatic, coming to you with ideas that seem to provide solutions for massive problems or crisis that is existing in your society, that's where you tend to get the most amount of influence taking place, because followers are therefore willing to listen to what you're saying and challenge the status quo. So let's take this lens now and look back at 1924, with the emergence of Hitler and the Nazi movement. They came with a solution for the problems um, of Germany at the time, 1947. Stalin came with a solution for the problems that Russia had, and the emergence of their situation. Chairman Mao, during that period, same issue in 1947 and the 50s, and led China into this type of development. 1997, we had the emergence of lots of cults in the United States, emerging cult leaders and cult people following cults coming out of um, the wow. I'll get to that in a little bit, but it was coming out of the movements that took place, the peace movements, and peace rallies that took place in the United States and Europe at the time, based upon the war. So the reason for looking at charisma was that they started to really look at it as something that we have to pay attention to because of the influence that these types of leaders can have on the individuals and their willingness to make significant change. Because think of another very positive, charismatic individual was John F. Kennedy. That he was a leader who was able to move the United States forward into a lot of activities. People felt really good about being American and joining the space race and ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That giving back to the nation and nation building kind of stuff. That was a really perfect time, and of course, by when he was killed, that then started to bring a different light to things, and people started to question, and that's actually one of the things that we could look at that influence the next set of theories that comes up. All right. So the conclusion that they come to with this is too much deference to an individual, meaning that when we give too much leeway to individual leaders as followers, we create dangerous problems for misuse of power in the future. Now, this is a concern I would have for somebody like Donald Trump getting back into power in the United States. He's charismatic. He speaks a language to a particular part of the United States where a very large percentage of their population is attracted to his ideas. He seems to be able to get their pulse. If he gets back into power, there's a great likelihood that he would misuse his power like he did the last time. Um, and that could be problematic across the board. All right. So those are the kind of things that we have to pay attention to. We have to be careful of calling up a leader when they're doing the wrong thing, and they're doing things that create problems for more people, um, especially if those ideas are very selfish in nature and are destructive to the society in general. All right, so coming out of that period now, we have the development of reciprocal leadership theories. So reciprocal really is about the relationship between leaders and followers. So this is coming up in the early 1970s, and again, in the 1970s, we're coming out of the 60s. We have the war going on in Vietnam. You have the anti-war movement. You have the rock and roll um, revolution. You have the British invasion by the British rock and roll artists, the Beatles and Beatlemania and Elvis Presley, and you have this movement towards. Um, for those of you who might be familiar with it, hold a second. For those of you who might be familiar with it, it'll be the flower power movement. And are you all familiar with that kind of stuff? Nobody is familiar with the flower power movement?
So will that be like the hippie era? Like,
Yes, the hippie movement. Those are other names for the same period
Talking
of
about
time.
like Woodstock timing, right, sir?
Woodstock, yeah, cool. Same thing time, yeah. In fact, Woodstock would be one of the highlights of that period as well.
So what you think about North Korea leader?
About which leader?
Yeah, not the leader for North Korea.
Okay, so he's a kind of what we call a despot type of leader. Um, is he's what's the word I want to use, buddy? Um, First off, I would say he's a dictator type leader, and he inherited that leadership. And interestingly enough, I think his father and grandfather they inherited that through their own charisma, with the with the way in which that particular part of Korea, because you remember that was part and parcel of why the United States got involved in a war in Korea. So they had the division of North and South Korea, um, and they are always threatening to unite or unify South and North Korea under the, well, supposedly it's supposed to be some form of communism, but it's not. It's more of a dictatorship kind of thing, and he's that's another weird situation there.
Very, I find them very controlling because you
Oh yeah,
have to have like a picture of his face
yeah,
inside your
yeah, yeah,
house.
yeah.
It's
That
very.
that is a cult type thing that they developed there, and if you don't,
But then Hitler is kind of similar because he wanted to have his flag in front of your house as well
yeah,
that time.
but
So
they
they,
do the same. But understand this. This is something that's also encouraged in the United States as a form of patriotism. The idea is though that one forces you to do it, the other one tells you, we encourage you to do it. In fact, if you're a proud American, you would have a flag flying on your car and you'll have it there. It's forms of patriotism like that. It's just the methodology that they're utilizing it of getting it done. In the form of North Korea, you have to always portray um, that sense of commitment to the organization and commitment to the leader. You can't say anything bad about them. If you do, then you get punished. Whereas which means there's no freedom in that country. All right, and which is what the whole fear of communism is about. Huh? So that was another thing, because in the 60s and 70s we had the same um, communist scare that was going on, Red Scare, that's what they spoke about in the 50s as well. Coming out of World War II, you had the Cold War, but more importantly, you had the anti-war riots or protest movement in Europe and in thing, which was anti-war movement, especially with the Vietnam situation and so on, which the a lot of drug taking, a lot of um, what we want to use, free love movement. What do you think led to the? What do you think led to that free love movement? Something that was really important was invented back in the 70s. Da, da, da.
So where's your question? What you ask?
Something in the 70s kind of opened up that free love movement.
What was that? Some kind of drug or something?
Yeah,
Cocaine?
it was a drug.
Ecstasy? I don't know.
Sorry? It wasn't cocaine, it was a legal drug. Actually, so
Oh,
let me
Viagra?
no, Viagra. What the hell is wrong with you?
Marijuana? I don't know.
No, marijuana was just part of the drug scene, LSD and stuff. No, what was really important in the free love movement, where people were just open to have sex with people, and you have to also remember, women's liberation came up during that period as well. You understand? Women's lib and all that kind of stuff was coming up with that. That was the invention of the pill, as a contraceptive. That
okay.
allowed for the development of some of these movements that took place, free love and um, that yeah that is part of the whole movement that took place. Now let's look at the theories development during this period. Okay, so reciprocal leadership theories is emerging during this period, and it emphasizes both followers and leaders working on mutually agreed to goals, and therefore what was happening, they were basically elevating the importance of followers in the leadership process. One of the things that became popular during this period in time as well was the emergence of a lot of Eastern, Asian, and Indian influence in thinking during this period of time, because a lot of the stars and the followers were heading across to India on pilgrimage, and across the Japan in particular too was another place that they went to, and they would meet with all these swamis and gurus and stuff like that. And they'll have these meetings and talk about things and whatnot, and they would come back and start to create those types of relationships where you have to pay attention to the leader just can't be saying do this, do that, do the next, and forget about anything with the leader. All right. Um, so here, these theories really talked about engaging with everybody and trying to develop a more inclusive method of developing your leadership techniques and practices. All right. Another element of that was not only the inclusiveness of the followership in the activities of the group and a lack of focus on the or diminished focus on the leader alone was also in the the concept of looking at the nature of the ethical values, because that's another thing that took place, because during this period in time you had a lot of distrust for authorities and the status quo. They distrusted a lot of the motivation behind decisions that were being made by leaders during this period of time, and it kind of emphasized itself in these programs or these new theories or approaches to theory to leadership by looking at the ethical value system. So this is where things started to get a little more, um, a little wider in terms of its thing. So in essence, you're also looking at leadership empowering participants and that type of stuff. So let's look at the theories that came up during this period. We have the transforming leadership theory, servant leadership, and the followership theory. Now we've already kind of met this a little bit, so I'm going to kind of speed through this because you guys are going to be actually dealing with servant leadership theory from one of the DAF chapters when we're looking at that. So you all will do a lot more details there. So transformational leadership theory from McGregor and Burns. Transforming leadership as a process where leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. So in essence, basically what's going on here is that the responsibility of moving the organization together was really going to be about us working together. So the leader, his job is to motivate the other people to work towards the objectives, and we are working together following higher ideals and moral values, not the lower ideas such as fear, greed, jealousy, but we are looking at liberty, justice, equality. So kind of like, we are trying to develop a more positive outlook. We are basing our decision making and our actions on higher moral values such as liberty, justice, equality, and we are not looking at, making people feel afraid of where they are, and what they're doing. So that is something that I've noticed, for example, in a couple of our last elections, both here in Trinidad and in the United States, is that the emphasis was not so much on what was good or higher ideals and high moral values and stuff, but a lot of the actions um, that politicians were utilizing were based on fear. So they were afraid of what was taking place, and they would kind of create this situation where they say, well, if we don't do this, this will happen, and that kind of stuff. So that fear-oriented leadership, decision-making, leadership relationship was kind of a weird thing that was happening. Um, would you all agree with that? Do you all feel that or see that in the last couple of elections that took place?
So, like, when elections come in, government does want to pave the road and thing. It's like a way to bribe people to
Well,
vote.
that's part of the behavioral patterns that we see coming up. But what I was talking about was more about uh, almost like, if you don't vote for me, you wouldn't get a job. If you don't vote for me, um, this will happen and that will happen. That kind of stuff is what I'm talking about,
Oh,
really. Yeah. So
You,
sort of
you
like
see,
there is that type of development. taking place there, or techniques that are utilized. But it's not. These theories are asking us not to have that. That we are actually trying to work together to get things done, but we're utilizing more you know, more positive orientation to why we're doing what we're doing. Okay, so again, we are working with each other to get this done. So there's a big emphasis on followership and leadership working together, and so much so that leaders and followers are indistinguishable one from the other. All right. Okay. So let's look to the next theory. So these are some transformational leaders. I know most of you all should agree with them. All of them spoke to major changes and transformations during their actions. Um, so Lincoln with the movement towards emancipation. Um, we spoke about JFK just recently. We spoke about Martin Luther King. We spoke about Gandhi before and Roosevelt. The only new person here in this mix is the picture there of Mother Teresa. Um, she was really about changing your life towards poverty and looking after people and selflessness in doing what you're doing type of situation. All right, so transformational leaders or leadership is usually contrasted to transactional leadership. So basically, the difference between one and the other is transformational leadership is in fact, this is one of the topics you'll have as a debate topic. I'm just letting you know. Um, one of the all right. So transformational focuses on the motivational aspect of the the motivational aspect of the leader and their activities with people, whereas transactional leadership breaks down the leadership activity in the form of multiple transactions. So in essence, basically, you create transactions with your followership to get things done. So you do that by rewarding people. If you do this, you'll get that. We use transactional leadership with children a lot, and sometimes with you guys as well. Your bosses would utilize that, so you get time off if you do this kind of reward and punishment type of stuff, transactional in nature. So the idea here is there's a comparison going across between transformational and transactional, and at the end of the day, what we want to take from this is that both transactional and transformational have function and purpose, and different circumstances will require us to utilize either a combination of both or lean more on one as opposed to another, depending upon what's taking place around us. All right. Now, problem with these theories here is a lack of clarity and specifics in terms of how you're going to get this done. What do you do to be, transformational in nature, to be that to be that degree of openness? So that's one of the weaknesses with this kind of theory. The servant leadership theory posits now. This is a theory that actually Kamala Prasad Bissetta tried it when she moved in as when she became prime minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know if any of you all remember the that was what 2010, somewhere 2010, 2011 there somewhere. I don't know if you all remember this, where she kept on saying service, service, service as the mantra that she was utilizing for her government's actions. You all remember that, by the way? Yes, no, maybe? Hello? All right. Now, you don't remember that? Okay, so too far back? 2010, 2012? Nope. Okay, so basically, what she was trying was servant leadership means that the leader is the servant to the followers, and the job of the leader is to make sure that the followers are getting everything they need in order to make them um, to empower them to accomplish the goals of the organization, as well as to create the next set of leaders for the future. That's basically what servant leadership is all about. There's a subset of this that I think, or a form of this that that I was talking about in relation to Mrs. Prasad Bissessa, that she was trying, but the problem is that the vast majority of her ministers didn't quite get it, and they were kind of working from the old school thing. Um, they get into power and they could see what they can get out of it kind of situation. At least that's what I got from it. So the focus of a servant leader is that the leader becomes the servant of the followers. Um, a phrase that comes to mind when we talk about this is referred to as stoop to lead, um, meaning you lower yourself to the position of your followership to empower them to move forward and
So
become leaders themselves. Yes?
it's a way to explain like what people want, she will do.
Well, yes, but within reason of it, because it's not only about what people want; it's about what we agree to to do to move forward in a positive manner. Because what people want, it can in fact be very selfish. All right, but we are doing things we are empowering others, and yeah, we are empowering others to be able to do things for the greater good of society, not for personal development or personal needs and wants. That is the big challenge. There is always going to be about that. When you empower the people to do things, you have to ensure that they have agreed or to walk the road you're walking on. Simply because you can empower people to be selfish, which unfortunately is what took place in a lot of instances. People got very selfish, and it was, in fact, our society is very gimme gimme kind of situation, and the servant leadership kind of sits apart from it. But a lot of managers and leaders don't like this model because they don't like to see themselves as servants of others. So that's another thing. Again, problem with this leadership theory is about, how do you actually go about doing it? What are the activities that you have to engage in to be able to do this? Is one of the other issues that comes up with that theory as well. All right, again, clarity and specifics is that's where kind of what you're doing. Another element that they talk about here too is that in that leadership theory, high levels of ideals, high levels of moral values are going to be something that is commonality between each. Now the next theory, oh, keep on going backwards. Sorry about that, guys. Um, the next theory is stewardship. That's another thing that comes up, and it's the same thing like servant leadership, except with stewardship, you are the steward for the next generation of leaders, that type of stuff. But again, you're aiming at high levels of moral values. You are putting yourselves in a position to help other people to become the leaders of the followers. So the followership theory, we met this before, because we know these people here already. We know these terms about alienated followers. It's about developing a program of activities and leadership style that allows you to create effective followers by creating independent thinking, independent critical thinking individuals who are highly active and committed towards the achievement of the goals and objectives of the organization. These followers are able to manage themselves well, they're committed to the organization, to its purpose, principle, and to persons outside of themselves. So, again, not selfish in nature. They're able to build their competencies and focus on their maximum efforts. They're courageous, honest, and credible. All right. So these leadership program techniques, therefore, really work from making sure that we are all valuing the same thing. So we, instead of calling them followers, they refer to them as things like co-adventurers. I think I'd use the term associates and partners.
Team members.
Team members, right? So those are some of the terminologies utilized when we're describing this type of system. Problem again with this theory is, again, it lacks a bit of clarity. and specifics in terms of how to get them done. All right, so now, in order for us to describe the next set of theories, we have to kind of look at the changing paradigms between the end of, well, the 1900s coming into the 2000s. So prior to prior to this period, the most of these theories that were being developed about leadership sat upon the industrial paradigm. Now, what is the industrial paradigm? Let's think about our education system and consider how your classroom is set up. And if you ever go into a business place or you go into a factory, you'd see high levels of similarity between what happens on the factory floor and what happens in the classroom. The industrial paradigm means that the education system and the leadership systems that were put in place were positioned upon the concept of the industry being key. So that model requires that you create people who are educated enough to follow the instructions of the leader, but not motivated enough to be too independent thinking. So this is one of the problems that I've had with our education system here. We keep on talking about creating entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurial drive in our society, but our education system stunts individual thinking and creativity from the very beginning. Because the first thing they tell you to do in a classroom is to shut up and listen. Yes? That makes sense? You're not, in most instances, your creativity is discouraged by those around you. And that is problematic, because your theories are going to be based up. If you develop theories using that particular type of thinking, then the theories are going to be meeting those particular requirements at that point in time. Any points on that? Can you agree with that? Would you agree with that? You don't have to agree with everything I
So
say.
I guess it's like being quiet and listening, so like a form of respect.
Yeah, it is, but at the same time, if you look at the right, so do you have you ever experienced where your ideas are seen as being, or you've been told to shut up and listen to what I'm saying in a classroom? And I'm thinking you go back to your primary schools and go back to your secondary school situations. Think about it. It's heavy. It's more heavy-handed the lower down the system you go.
Yes, sir, I agree with that. So it's more of I'm the person who knows everything. You don't know anything, so listen to me because there's nothing that you should be able to contribute.
Right.
Would be able to contribute.
So it means right. So it means that the only way you can have an original thought or idea is if I give it to you, which negates it being original. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that this industrial model is what all of a lot of our systems that have been developed throughout the last century have been working around. This industrial work smarter, work harder techniques and that kind of stuff. This is the mindset that we have when we enter the education system, when we enter the job market. This is the basic thing that we're looking at across the board. So we have to actually look at what's happening now. All right. So leadership theory in the 20th century mirrored the industrial era, that the theories were structural functionalism, management oriented, personalistic, and focusing only on the leader, goal achievement dominated, self interested, and individualistic in outlook, male oriented, utilitarian and materialistic in ethical perspective, and rationalistic, technocratic, linear, quantitative, and scientific in language and methodology. Now, so there's a lot of descriptors inside there, and we could look at them from a particular thing. But it's all very stringent highly regulated activities that we're talking about. And of course, there's the gender specific nature of how management is looked at and how leadership is looked at. This is where the emergence of the glass ceiling comes up, for those of you who are familiar with that term. This is where women in large organizations find themselves facing this invisible barrier of rising to higher levels of leadership in business. And the same thing happens again, male dominated societies as well, male dominated leadership in the organizational. And women tend to also be one of their own worst enemies when it comes to leadership too. And that's another um, point that you can debate, because it's one of the topics. Men make better leaders than women. Something that you want to look at there. If you ever get a chance to look at some of those theories that we looked at before, especially the behavioral approaches and contingency, you'd see a whole pile of mathematics and statistical analysis going on with it. Very quantitative in nature, very technical, sometimes unnecessarily so. Linear, because there's only one kind of line lineage that we're looking for. So this is the paradigm that these theories were written on. But the situation is that the paradigm is changing and has changed, and we have to look at adjusting the methodologies that we're looking at to the new paradigms that we're dealing with now. And the paradigm that we're dealing with now is one of change. Massive, regular, and unprecedented change. It means that our societies are changing and reacting to external stimulus more rapidly than it had to in the past, because with the with the way in which our world economies are influenced by globalization, nothing happens anywhere without it affecting us, unless you're living under a rock. So it means that our societies are faced with unprecedented economic, technological, socio-political, moral, ethical change. All right, and there's definitely going to be a need for new theories, new applications, and just a different way of thinking about things. And that's what they refer to as paradigm shifting. And those
So, like
paradigm.
for example,
Mhm.
COVID-19.
Correct. Yes, a perfect example of having to make those changes has is that particular event. If we if we as an institution didn't make those adjustments, the college would have failed. We would not have existed at this point in time. Right? In fact, a lot of firms and businesses that were unable to make the change failed, and they no longer exist as we speak. You know that, right? All right. The problem is, much of what we teach in school doesn't prepare us for a world of rapid change. Why? Because we teach the concepts that we're dealing with now to work in highly controllable environments. So we always keep on talking about, conducting experiments in a nice, neat, orderly fashion, controlled world. The reality is that ain't happening. Now, if any of you all have OCD, this is a serious issue here, because I tend to have a real icky feeling, because I have some levels of OCD, and you can become non-functional in society where you're facing change like crazy all the time. And that's the reality of it, is that things are going to change and change and change, and you have to be able to adjust it. Now, this is actually the precursor to the theory that we want to talk about here, is that we need a new system that will deal with chaos. So this is chaos theory. Have you all ever come across this chaos theory concept before? Anybody?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, we heard about it, or we hear about it in films and all that stuff, but there's actually some chaos theory that we're going to be looking at here now as one of the methods of developing theories. So we have to be able to do a couple of things when we're dealing with a world that is made up of rapid change like this and unpredictable. That's part of the problem. The changes are not going to be predictable, but what we need to do is that this chaos is not it's chaos to us because we are unable to see the patterns in it until well after it occurs. And we have to work out a methodology of working within that chaos period to, survive and work and kind of develop. So our thinking has to be able to be very variable. All right. So chaos has been defined as order without predictability. There are two important chaos. Chaotic behavior has two important characteristics. It's inherently unpredictable, while at another level, it displays a hidden pattern. And the problem is that it's hidden. It's not a pattern that we can readily see. It's going to take some time for us to see it, and always in hindsight. All right. So the theories that we're going to be looking at now is what we could call quantum theory and chaos thinking. It's where we have to pay attention to certain things and pay attention to certain types of activities to be able to deal with the circumstances and situations that we're dealing with. And a couple of things, you all could come in and read this on your own, but it's a really crazy kind of theory. One of the first things we have to do is we have to pay attention to what starts the change. That's the first thing that they keep on talking about here. All right. So we have to be sensitive to the initial conditions. So we need to know, all right, what happened when this started, and we have to pay attention to that and keep an eye on what happened at the beginning. Remember that, because when we find ourselves at some other position later on down the road, we have to be able to map the change across the board. Now, the other element is we have to stop thinking about ourselves as independent from each other and start to think about relationships and connections and connectivity. So the concept here is andness. Andness in the sense of we together working together to get it done. And andness in the sense that we need to and different visions, different points of views, and different solutions together to get to an overall solution. Because so that's where this term andness becomes, and connecting, or literally what they say here, anding with them, because there's not going to be a simple response to the problem that you're facing. It's not a simple, straightforward approach. There's no one way to get it done. And therefore, what you're going to find is a lot of partial answers that will eventually give you some sort of correct or at least approachable manner of dealing with the issue. So we have to get rid of the either or mentality and think both and, not either or. So something will be both right or wrong, and can be both right and wrong at the same time. I hope you could get that. Um, so the idea is that some part of what you're thinking is right, and part of what you're thinking is also wrong. That's something that we wanna bring to. So that anding type of technique you're talking about there is really important. So we talked about it again. We have to pay attention to the initial situation. We have to be more open to developing networks and relationships that help us to find these these partial solutions to be able to bring maybe three or four different wrong things together to make a right thing. You understand? So you get partial responsibles or partial system solutions, because again, the speed at which some of these things are happening, you have to come up with a number of different approaches to trying to get the problem sorted out. So that's why you have multiple partial solution as opposed to just one simple solution. This is one of the reasons why we're not dealing with the crime issue in our country properly, because we're still looking at it under the old paradigms of how we view um, how we view national security, because the concepts that we're looking at are still based upon an older paradigm, and therefore we keep on throwing the same kind of solutions out for a problem that has moved on beyond a lot of what we have in mind since then. So it's one of the reasons why um, yeah, we have to kind of rethink where we are, what we're doing. We can't use the same things, and therefore we can't be looking for a one and done solution. We have to look for multiple different activities or strategies to be able to tackle this very wide and all-encompassing type of issue. And that's just one issue, because one issue impacts upon another and so on. So it's a kind of chaotic situation. Now, as I said before, if you are an OCD individual, you're going to have problems coping with a world like this. In fact, if you are, surviving now, you're surviving based upon your ability to deal with that, right? Um, there are no simple, straightforward answers, and that's the reality of it. Even with your within an organization or within the community, within your household, the problems have a complex nature. It kind of feels icky when you look at it, when you're dealing with the problem, because you know that whatever you're doing is not the end all and be all. There's a whole set of this may work, may not work kind of situation going on there. All right. Now, interestingly enough, people indicate to you that chaotic systems are self-organizing, which means because they are um, because they eventually have a pattern, it tends to work itself through and finds a new equilibrium. That's something we talk about in economics a lot. That equilibrium will find itself again eventually, but in the meantime, things go wrong. Now, the theory is very vague, and it's part of the problem of why anybody who's looking into chaos theory, it's really a very vague type of thing. There's not a lot of hard and fast activities you could get into. Um, so it does have problems in terms of its application, but we have to remember that this is the world we live in, and these are some of the solutions or some of the methodologies that they're speaking about. Now, coming out of this is that we would respond to these things by trying to do certain things to be able to get ourselves in a way to address the issues. So lots of different types of organizations. People will naturally just create organizations, or organizations will come up with no leadership or no leaders in it, and then eventually some leadership might develop out of it, and then status quo will start to stick it. So again, the good thing about it is nothing can become too fixed. Um, this is one of the reasons why a lot of status quo becomes challenged during periods like this. And again, when you have status quo being challenged, we have to look out for those dangerously charismatic individuals who are likely to get us into different issues. Now, that then leads us into something called a very interesting leadership model here called the authentic leadership model. And this leadership model is based upon the broadening of the reciprocal leadership theories, models, but adding into that the concept of an authentic leader with authentic followers. Now, so authentic leadership is defined as or described as the confluence of positive psychology, transformational leadership, and moral ethical leadership. And the authentic leader is somebody who is confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral and ethical, future oriented, and gives priority to developing associates to be leaders. All right. So that sounds very what? Anybody give me a word that describes this particular set of characteristics for a leader. Anybody? Ms. Jones?
What motivational?
Motivational? All right. Yeah, I would. Okay, so this sounds motivational to you. Anybody? Anything else comes to? Sorry.
A true leader, true leader, like you're not trying to be fake. You're trying to be just.
Yeah.
Like
True.
yeah.
Yeah. But what else comes to mind? Yes, Taryn.
Someone who lives on the positive side
Uh huh. Yeah.
of life. not the negative side. Who
Yeah.
sees hope, like who sees
Yes.
hope and people, but like a greater dream in the world.
All right. Good. 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 All right. Anybody else?
That is the transformational.
Well, this is the authentic leadership, but
Oh, the
remember,
authentic.
it's based on the
Okay.
relational theory too. All right. So one of the things that comes up with this particular theory that because we're getting near the end of class time, is that this theory is highly idealistic in nature. Because a lot of these things, what we're looking at here is a very good ideal. And like any theory, theories tend to be pitched into highly idealistic positions because they go on to talk about some of the other characteristics of these leaderships, these leaders, persons who have achieved high levels of authenticity in that they know who they are, what they believe in, what their values are, and they act upon those values and beliefs while transparently interacting with others. Now, this is an ideal. It'd be really good for us to be getting this done. But the reality is that we're going to get a subset of people like this. While you might have somebody who has very good high ideals and stuff, they may not do everything transparently when they interact with other people because there's this natural urge to protect yourself, and that is something that is human nature. If you are engaging in activities that can be highly embarrassing or can open yourself up to a high level of criticism and ridicule, there's that tendency for us to want to protect ourselves, regardless of how correct the behavior is. It's still that it doesn't mean that you are going to want to open yourself up to self-criticism and self-harm. That's another element. So, regardless of what we're talking about here, the authentic leadership theory, though an excellent theory, is exactly that. It's a theory for us to aspire towards. And the closer we can get to the authentic leadership theory, is the better it will be in the future moving forward. Because to get everybody to buy into this type of activity is going to be a challenge. All right, and it's not only about the leader, but also followers have to be authentic as well, and that's going to be a really critical and situation. So these are some of the other follower activities: transparency, openness, and trust, guidance towards worthy objectives, emphasis on follower development. These are a lot of the characteristics that they keep on talking about with these things. So, not to write this off as a hairy fairy thing, but again, this theory kind of lacks some of the what's the word I want to use? Some of the clear guidelines as to how to go about achieving this kind of thing. Um, Guys, just give me 1 second here. All right, sorry about that, guys. Right, so as I was saying, authentic leaders they have to engage in a lot of things that might be a bit of a challenge to move forward. But again, as with anything that is good or idealistic in nature, it's a good objective for us to move towards. All right. Um, so let us move into the conclusion of this presentation. So we have been looking at um, wait, let me take us to that thing here. Let's see if I'm not missing anything. Right. So we've been looking at the emergence of management and well, not management, but leadership theory and its evolution over time. We've started from looking at it from from the Middle Ages, which is like the 1800s when we talk about no the early 1300s moving forward, and we've been looking at how the concept of leadership was dealt with and has changed over time. We have looked at all of the various theories that have emerged, and we examined the need for us to make certain changes in the 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 framework under which we're working, or the paradigms under which we're working to understand and develop theories about it. So we looked at this last theory here, authentic leadership. Um, so it's a new way for us to look at leadership. Might be a little difficult for us to get to, but it's important. So there's a lot of things that we did here. I don't need you to memorize any of this stuff. I just need you all to go through it, understand these ideas, um, kind of come to grips with the idea that leadership is not something that just land in your plate. It's a concept, it's an idea that has been in flux for a long period of time. There are no exams on this material, so don't go panic in yourselves as well. Similarly, next week we are going to be moving into the next chapter, which is going to give us a lot more details about the relational leadership model, which you all will be further developing as you do your presentations. So, any questions about this stuff here, guys? If you want, these slides are available to download, so you could go down, you could download them and have a look at them in more details if you want. All right, no questions.
No, sir.
All right, so if we
The slides, you'll put those on over the weekend?
They're on the e-classroom all the time. They've been there from the beginning.
Oh, I thought it was a different one. Okay, no problem.
So, before you go, concerning the presentation, what's the time limit on the presentation for each group?
For each group, since it's 2 groups per session, I would say you should be finished by an hour and a half.
Okay.
All right. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.